So there was a lot of confusion, a lot of psychology, a lot of other ideas came into the church to upset the vocation, the direction, and the focus of many, many good men and women. And I have to say that I too experienced some of that confusion. And so at the end of my third year, I actually left the seminary. But I remember particularly one young man who introduced himself as, "I've been a priest for 10 years and I'm here to find out what religion is all about." And that was the moment I decided to go back to the seminary, because I realized that though I was confused, I was not as confused as he was. It was, in a paradoxical way, an affirmation of my vocation. My name is John Murray. I am a priest, as you can see, of the Diocese of Down and Connor. That's an area that encompasses two counties in the north of Ireland, County Down and County Antrim. I come from County Down. It's the southern, just below the city of Belfast. And I come from a little village called Ballygowan. Now, Ballygowan means literally the village or the town of the blacksmith. Now, there's no blacksmith in my village now, but for, I suppose, 40, 50 years ago, when farmers didn't have nice tractors but had horses to pull their ploughs, they needed the blacksmith. He was a very important figure in the town, and that's what Ballygowan means. And in fact, there are several towns of that name in the island of Ireland. My family was a very, I would say, ordinary family. My dad grew up in a business that we called it a spirit grocer. We have in Ireland, we had a political phenomenon. We called it the Troubles, where there was conflict between not so much Catholic and Protestant, but between those who wanted to belong to Britain and the Irish, who were mainly Catholic, and they wanted to separate to become part of a united Ireland. We said the rosary every night, and that wasn't always something holy. I can remember as we knelt on the floor, sometimes one of the brothers, there were four of us, three brothers and a sister, would play the idiot, would make fun or something, or would fall asleep or pretend to fall asleep, or mother would dunt somebody in the ribs saying, "It's your mystery." Each one of us had to take a turn in giving out the mysteries of the rosary. But through that playfulness, there was a lovely spirituality as well. We went to Mass on Sunday in the local parish. We had to travel 2-3 miles. Although I didn't become an altar server, that church was a very important facet of my own life. I can remember often cycling up to it to spend time in prayer. And I suppose that's where my vocation began to be formed. I found it a very peaceful thing to do, just to go up there. Generally there was nobody else in the church, just myself, and outside the church was a cemetery, and you could hear the birds in the trees, and there was a beautiful, beautiful peace at that time. My own parents, when it came their time to pass, they were buried very close to the church in that cemetery. Primary school days, I certainly did not think about the priesthood, but it began to emerge in my secondary school. I can remember around about the age of 14 thinking about the priesthood for the first time, and thinking at that stage our secondary school life is 7 years long, from 11 to 18 years of age, and thinking, yes, this is what I'd like to do. But at 14, it seemed such a long time. You know the way when you're young, you think that a year is forever. But that time passed, and I didn't receive any diminution in the sense of vocation. It grew stronger. In fact, other boys in my year group recognized that, and there was an acceptance of that then. There was some little jibing. Sometimes other fellas might call you a holy person as such. But by and large, my classmates accepted that while they might be thinking about the law or medicine or business world, that they recognized that I was thinking about the priesthood. And in those days, way back, in the mid-1960s, there was really no real apparatus, if you like, for acceptance. You just applied and you were accepted. There was no psychological assessment. I didn't have to get a reference from anybody except my parish priest. I remember I didn't actually see what he wrote, but when the president of the seminary opened up the letter, I could see there were only 2 lines in the letter. You could see it from the other side, which probably just said that John Murray was a practicing Catholic, and the priest had no problem in recommending him. Now, later on, when I became vocation director myself, we established a very rigorous system of selection and acceptance of candidates for the seminary. So I was accepted in 1968, and I entered the seminary, which was in Belfast. And at that time, it was fairly full. I remember there were 20 young men in the seminary at that time, spread over 3 or 4 years. And we went from the seminary every day to Queen's University. It was the main university in the city of Belfast. And we walked across the town, or some guys had bikes. I had a bike at one time, but it was stolen on me later on in my years in the seminary, and I don't think I replaced it. So those years in seminary were good. Now it was strict. We rose early in the morning. We had a time of prayer and then breakfast. It was a very full day. We also had priests coming in from outside. It was organised by the staff to talk to us about different aspects of the priesthood. And we always enjoyed those times. The priests were coming in. Some of them were great characters, people who had lived the priesthood in the diocese. And if you like, once that Pandora's box, if I can use that analogy, had been opened, a lot of psychology, a lot of other ideas came into the church to upset the vocation, the direction, and the focus of many, many good men and women. And I have to say that I too experienced some of that confusion. So after 3 years in the seminary, I felt that I wasn't sure that I wanted to be a priest. And so at the end of my 3rd year, I actually left the seminary. And I continued what was my 4th year, the 4th year of the degree, from home. And that was okay. I was focused very much on the studies. I had to work hard. I was doing a degree in philosophy. I had a dissertation to write. I had several exams to do. I ended up with a reasonable degree. At the end of that time in the university, I managed to get a degree in philosophy. And I'd been looking around, what was I going to do next? I certainly was not going back to the seminary. It was not strong at that time. I was very confused. And I'd found this course on religious studies. In fact, it was the only one in the whole of England. Now, it was a course, a department on religion and the philosophy of religion. It would have looked at all religions. All religions, as far as they were concerned, were the same. So I went to it. My poor parents were confused, sad, but in retrospect, I thanked them for not interfering, if I could put it that way. I know that certainly they would have been praying. My good mother would certainly have been praying very hard for me. So I ended up in Lancaster. It's in the north of Lancashire, in the northwest corner of England. And I arrived there in the middle of a week. And on the Friday of that particular week, the faculty, the lecturers didn't start until the following week. We all had to gather in this small lecture room, about 40, I remember, men and women, and we each had to say who we were, where we had come from, and more importantly, why we were there. And I was at the back of the room, so I had an opportunity to listen to all of the others. And I listened, and everyone was courteous and polite and answered those 3 questions. But I remember particularly one young man who introduced himself as, I've been a priest for 10 years and I'm here to find out what religion is all about. And that was the moment I decided to go back to the seminary. Because I realized that though I was confused, I was not as confused as he was. It was, in a paradoxical way, an affirmation of my vocation. Now, God knows I have prayed for that young man. He was probably about 33, 34 years of age. He'd been in a parish. I somehow remember it was somewhere in Wales, I think, Cardiff perhaps. And I've prayed for him. I hope that he had a good life, managed to find something that fulfilled him. But that was the moment that I decided I would go back. And on the following morning, I remember, in fact, that afternoon, I went to the faculty secretary, told her I was leaving. She tried to dissuade me, of course. And I listened courteously, but had made up my mind. But I still hadn't a sure point in my own heart. And I said, Lord, I have to know it's from you. And I went into a church. I found a church that was open. And I remember saying to the Lord, it was a bit like Gideon's fleece, if you know the story in the Bible. And I said, Lord, I'm not leaving this church until you give me a sign. And I sat and I prayed. And as many people know, when they pray, you don't get any wonderful illuminations. But if I can use my hands, it wasn't as if I was looking for a sign that the Lord would definitely show me that this was it. But it was more like this, just a little push to take the step of faith. Now, the following morning, I took the boat back to Ireland, but I didn't go home to my parents immediately. Somehow I just couldn't face them until I'd met the bishop. And the bishop met me, listened to my story, made his decision, and 5 days later I was in Rome. That's where he sent me to begin my theological studies. I remember going out to my parents after that, took the bus from Belfast to Ballygan, the little village 10 miles away, and they were shocked, but I know that deep down inside they were also very, very happy. Shocked in a sense too that I was going to immediately disappear from their lives for another few months, because when we went to Rome we couldn't get home at that stage at Christmas or Easter, so you were there virtually the whole length of the academic year. But I know that they were deep down happy. And what the Lord did, and this is the marvelous thing that I've found in my own life of helping others and directing them, is that the Lord blessed me for about 6 to 7 weeks with a champagne joy. It was just a bubbling joy. I'm not an effervescent person or a bubbling person normally. I like to think of myself as even-keeled. But for about 6 or 7 weeks, I just had this beautiful, beautiful joy that was the Lord saying, you've made the right step. And I've had no regrets since that. That continued 3 years in the Gregorian University to achieve or acquire my basic degree. And then I had the opportunity to study for the license, and I chose to study liturgy with the Benedictines at the Institute of St. Anselm. And that was a lovely experience. And I fully expected to complete that license. It was a 2-year license, as for all licenses. And that meant coming back for the 2nd year as a priest. But then one day our Vicar General was out in the college and he took me aside and he said, "John, you're not going back to Rome to complete that year." And I was very disappointed at the time. So I completed the 1 year of the 2-year course, came back to Belfast and was ordained on what was a very special date in American history. It was the 200th anniversary of American independence, the 4th of July, 1976. And after a month's holiday then, the bishop, and in those days it was very impersonal, it wasn't a call up to the bishop's office, but he sent literally a letter in the post telling me where I was going to be assigned. And I was assigned to a new parish on the edge of Belfast. It was vibrant, full of young families. There was an excitement in the air, and myself and my colleague who was ordained just a year after me, he's now bishop in Derry, Donald McKeown is his name, we ran lots of things for the parish, and it was a very, very wonderful time for 9 years in my case. The bishop, at the time it was a man called Cahill Daly, he later became Cardinal Daly, he took me aside and he said, "John, I'm moving you to become vocation director in the diocese." And that's what happened in the summer of 1985. I became 3 things, in fact: vocation director, spiritual director in the seminary, and then also spiritual director in the school to which the seminary was attached. It was a large boys' school that had at one time been a boarding school and now was a vibrant and huge. There were over 1,000 boys in the school. I was vocation director for 29 years, and I'm proud of that, that he kept me on in the job. Maybe he couldn't find anybody else. I'm not so sure about that. But I was 29 years as vocation director, so I met literally hundreds of young men and women who expressed an interest in pursuing a religious vocation. Bishop, again, and this is the vow of obedience. Sometimes people say, what is the most difficult vow to take? Now, as secular priests, we don't take a vow of poverty. We take a vow of chastity, which is the commitment to be single. Not in the sense of being deprived of marriage, but we are single for the Lord, single for His people. The most beautiful title that I have is Father. And I am a father to a parish, a father to people. We in a sense give life, spiritual life, to many, many people, and that is the most gracious title that I know I have as a priest. But the one thing I will always try to put in, and I do this on a Sunday night, is the times of prayer, to try not to allow something to interrupt those. So that if somebody were to ring me or to say, "Can I see you tomorrow?" let's say between 4 and 5, I would say, "No, I'm sorry, I have an appointment then." I don't tell them, but it's an appointment with God, and that surely is far more important. And as a vocation director, when I look back at all the hundreds of young men that I have met, I think sometimes, and I hope this is not too much of a judgment, I'd like to think that some of those young men who couldn't make the commitment, and really maybe they weren't necessarily listening to what the Lord wanted, I hope that they have been happy. I hope they've found what they were looking for. But listening to the Lord sometimes involves a choice. The world today offers us many choices, and the trouble for many people is they want to have all their options open all the time. And taking the The Lord's option, choosing the religious vocation, is saying, yes, I'm going to choose this one. That means I can't be married. I can't have children. But if you take the Lord's option, what the Lord wants for you, I guarantee you will be happy. The Lord, it's a bit like, Peter stepping out of the boat. And he does so in trepidation and fear, but once he puts his hand into the hand of the Lord, everything is okay. And for me, in my own vocation story, when I made that decision to go back to the seminary after a time out, the Lord blessed it with this bubbling champagne joy that I mentioned earlier. You take the step, there's always a little bit of faith. Trust me, the Lord is saying, trust me, and things will work out.
Problems, worries, sadness. Are you seeking solutions?
Bible says,
Do not be anxious about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Choose faith over fear.